Welcome to Beholder Beauty, where we talk about beauty, faith, and some of the difficult things in life so that you know that you're not alone. And together we stir up good works for God's kingdom. And my guest today is author, speaker, podcaster, and coach, Rebecca George. And Rebecca's new book is You're Not Too Late. And it's just a wonderful book. And you can see I've been working through it. And she's also, her last book was Do the Thing. And her podcast is Radical Radiance Podcast. And so, Rebecca, welcome.
Oh, Deborah, I'm excited to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so excited you're here. And why don't we start by telling our listeners a little about you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, just as you can probably say the same, Deborah, I wear a lot of hats, but I'll tell you about a few of them. So, I live in East Tennessee, if you can't tell by my accent. And I'm married to Dustin, who is the local lead pastor of our local church here in East Tennessee, where we live. So I'm a pastor's wife. That's a huge part of my life. And as you beautifully said a minute ago, a lot of creative things are a part of my career. So I'm a writer, an author. I speak out on the road quite a bit. I host a podcast, as you mentioned, and love coaching clients who also do those things. And I do that through coaching one on one. And I host a retreat every year in September here in the Smokies, which is just one of my favorite things that I get to do is share where I live with people that I love. And so, just generally, I would say I'm very passionate about creating conversations and resources that point women to what it looks like to radiate the heart of Christ in all that we do in our life, our work, our relationships, all of those things. And so, most of pretty much everything I do leads to that end. So, that's a little bit. That's 30,000 foot view.
No, and I love that. I was thinking about that about you, and we'll get a little bit more into that with your book too, because you just have this ability to always be pouring into others and supporting others, and then sometimes when we might feel like we're too late, and you do write about that,
Mhm.
how if we're pouring into others, but what if it's not happening for us yet, and how we
Yeah.
balance that tension. But we're going to come back to that. First, we're going to do our beauty questions because I know that
Oh, I love
both
it.
you and I love beauty.
Yes.
And
I woke up this morning, Deborah, so excited to talk to you because we just both share love for that. And so I love that that's part of your podcast.
yeah, and it's so let's start with something fun.
Okay.
What is your favorite lipstick color and or beauty tip?
Okay. Oh, there's so many, aren't there? Like, how do I pick one? I'll give you my most recent one, though. I'm wearing the lipstick I'm going to tell you about. So it's kind of a combination between a stain and a gloss. So it's NYX, NYX, Lip IV is what it's called. So it's on, I call it the drugstore section of Ulta. So it has a lower price point, but I actually find for me that it stays on really well for several hours, which is key for me because so much of what we do, we're on camera or we have a busy day of doing things like you and I are doing right now, recording podcasts. I hate like having to put on something like in between everything that I do. So maybe it's a tip and a product at the same time because it's been really helpful to me.
Yeah, it is very pretty, and you're absolutely right because you don't want to get on your glass, and then you.
That's right. Yes.
So, but I like that lip line. NYX is it's a very good product. It's very long standing, and
Yeah.
actually, it is used a lot. There will be actresses who will ask for that specifically,
Really?
yeah, like the concealer because it's long staying. And again, like you said, you want something that like whether you're doing what we're doing, podcasts, running around, being seen in the public, or whether you're being on film or television, or whether you're a bride, you need
Mhm.
something that's going to stay on
Yeah. Yeah.
and not smear and then you don't have to worry about it. You just want to just do your makeup once and then walk away for a
Mhm.
while. Yeah,
Mhm.
so no, it is a product that people do use. And it's not so much, I think, the price on them. It's just finding the ones that, one, the color,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then the consistency that you like, and then
Mhm.
it does what you like it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a, and then just little behind the scenes of product companies, because a lot of them are made from the same factory.
Really?
So, so if you think about that now, there is a difference. And okay, example, Benetton and Lime Life Alcone.
Okay.
They use the same factory,
Okay.
but when they make their setting spray,
Yeah.
Lime Life by Alcone, I think I'm saying it correctly, they opt for a what they call a cleaner spray. Like it has different, not as many
Any
chemicals in it. Like
chemicals? Yeah.
you can pay different tiers, different prices. You can put in what you
Sure.
want. So that's the variable there.
Sure.
And I'm sure that
Quality.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that affects the price too.
Yeah.
You
That's so
know.
interesting because we think about that with, I don't know, food products we buy, like chips that, across different brands, we would say, well, of course they're made in the same factory, but we don't think about that in terms of makeup. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really cool.
yeah. I guess there's only so many of so many's. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then we're talking about our beauty in the sense of appearance, and one thing I'd like to tell listeners, Rebecca is a wonderful coach, and she coached me
Yeah.
on a book proposal, which I did get an agent from.
Ooh,
So
so awesome.
I
I'm
know.
so
So
proud of you.
use Rebecca. No,
Oh, I love
you
that.
gave me such valuable advice and feedback and critique and actually confidence too.
Yeah. Praise
But one
God.
thing you said, which this theme is in your book too, because we were talking about it through the beauty lens, and you said that with your generation, the idea of perfection in because of the longing for Eden type thing, and
Mm.
sometimes how we balance the seasons in our life. So I thought that was really interesting, and I didn't know if you wanted to talk anything about that because on my question, have you ever struggled with your beauty?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Deborah, I I think we all have. So, I mean, my answer is of course yes, whether it be I would say for me more than beauty, maybe the more specific version of that for Rebecca was body image. So, throughout my life, that has been a major challenge for me in different ways in different seasons. I would say more recently in my 20s, before I got married, I was longing to be married and to enter that next season of life and had a big corporate career and love to run. I still love to run, but I don't do nearly as much of it as I used to. But I would almost choose maybe a goal like I'll train for this marathon. Let's just use that as the example. And I would set a goal for myself and maybe sign up for a race 6 months ahead of time or so to give myself time to train. And I would say, well, my goal is to run this specific time or whatever. And so I would train to that end, but really the goal behind the goal was to fit in a certain pair of jeans, right? Like it really wasn't about the marathon. It was about what training for and doing that marathon would do to my body. And so I think it was a creative like brain trick that my brain played on what was probably a pretty unhealthy pattern of over exercising. And so maybe listeners listening, running marathons isn't your thing, but maybe you listen to that and go, oh, maybe, yeah, maybe I've done that in a past season or whatnot. But yeah, I think perfectionism is so huge for our generation because I think about my mom and my grandmother, let's just say 2 generations ahead of me. This struggle of perfectionism isn't new, but I think the way that it shows up and the intensity of it in our lives because of technology is just different generation to generation. I think about like, my mom doesn't have social media. She's not on Facebook, she's not on Instagram. So she's not seeing her friends from high school in a bathing suit on a beach trip in her 50s and 60s as I will, right? And so I do think some of those things impact sometimes kind of our obsession with our bodies, with beauty, with how we age. I mean, that's a huge conversation and how we view that. I look at some of the older women in my life that have mentored me, that have walked alongside me. And sometimes I was sitting across the table from my grandmother about a month ago, and talk about a woman who has aged so beautifully and so gracefully and like in a natural way. And I looked across the table and she was laughing at something, and I mean, I saw the wrinkles that were indicative of, like, all the laughs and the tears of her life, and I got emotional thinking about, like, man, she's one of the most beautiful people that I know, and she's done this really well. And so, I don't know if that answers your question, but those are just things that are popping
No,
into my mind when it
it
comes to
does. It
perfectionism.
does. I think it's healthy to look at it that way. I remember probably when I was in my 20s and I lived in Los Angeles and I was taking the bus. So I got on the bus and there was this old woman that just radiated, and she had this
Mm.
long white hair and these blue eyes, and I just looked at her and I just went, "Oh, that's how I want to be when I'm her age." And I just thought
Yeah.
that was just such a keepsake to that maybe God gave me to tuck in my pocket, especially as the field that I've worked in, when I see a lot of people start playing around with, say, plastic surgery or Botox or
Yeah.
things. And I'm not going to say any either way. I'm just say I personally don't use any of those, but I'm a complete cream
Yeah.
serum person. I'm like, I love them and they do work. But I think it's what you're talking about, your grandmother. It's lifestyle, and it's your regular lifestyle as a human being, but it's also I think your spiritual lifestyle. I know
Mhm.
my husband's side, he's from East Tennessee too, from Knoxville,
Mhm.
and his aunts are Aunt Hazel and Aunt Evelyn. Aunt Evelyn lived to 93, I think, and Hazel
Wow.
100. And they
Wow.
were, and his mom is, she's 94, I think, right now. But they're just beautiful. Their
Yeah.
skin was just gorgeous, and it's a well lived life.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to keep in frame because of the social media thing, how it can. In my day, it was 17 magazine, and
Yeah.
it was like, oh gosh, I don't look like these models. How can I look like them? So what do you when you start feeling any tension in that area,
Mm.
what helps you, like we know we're God's beautiful daughter, but what helps you bring yourself really back to know that?
Yeah. I would say a couple of things. One, usually it's triggered by the online space. So sometimes that's just indicative that I need a break from it. And fortunately or unfortunately, our jobs require us to be online quite a bit. And so I can and sometimes have to be a little bit more militant about only working online and not just scrolling on my phone. I noticed about myself a few weeks ago, I had not read a book in a few weeks, and I had just gotten in this bad habit of scrolling on my phone before I went to bed. And I actually have started saying this, and this has come up in a few podcast interviews in the last few weeks, but I think it's helpful. It's been helpful to me. When I find myself scrolling and scrolling and scrolling before I go to bed, that is actually a sign of unhealth for me. Like I am numbing out about something, or I'm just choosing, and that's not to say I have to be productive in that time, but like if I'm not spending time with my husband or reading a book, getting lost in a story or whatever, right? If I'm just choosing to numb out, that is a sign of something. And so that can a little bit become kind of a guardrail of sorts to go, "Ooh, I'm getting a little bit out of line here." And it actually is pretty challenging, I think, in our generation to kind of halt that and then choose the better thing. But that usually is step one for me. And then I think step two is just living our lives. Like if I'm focused on what God has put in front of me, if I'm being faithful to that, if I'm taking care of my body, like if I'm getting enough sleep, if I'm not dehydrated, if like all of those things, if those are out of whack, then I'm probably not going to feel great about myself anyway. And so I think halting that behavior that is unhelpful, taking care of myself, and then investing in the things that God has put in front of me, those three things solve it 98% of the time for me.
Mm, yeah, no, I feel that tension too, and that kind of goes in. So we can kind of go into your book at this point.
Yeah.
You're not too late. Trusting God's timing in a hurry up world, and so we'll kind of segue that what you were just talking about because in the book you were talking about how the social media you get the what is it the serotonin or the like each time you
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
and that will happen to me. I'll be sitting there and like my husband's right there or there's a
Yeah.
movie on and I'm on the phone going I'll be
Uh-huh.
like oh my gosh like and then I'll start getting agitated. It's almost like I can kind of compare it to when I would binge eat.
Mm.
It's a form
Yeah.
of binging in a sense, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Totally.
Yeah, yeah. And so we do have to control it and I kind of do what you do. I kind of put parameters on it.
Yeah.
Like this is like I try not to even look at it until
Yeah.
till I've woken up, done coffee and breakfast and
Hmm.
Bible and prayer and my devotion time, and then I'm okay. Now you can have some of me. They kind of
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good.
because it does take some of you, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree.
And I want to support people on there and be part of it, but not where it becomes abusive or indulgent or, like you said, numbing
Yeah.
ourselves. And my
Yeah.
tendency will start going to accounts that I don't know
Yeah.
because I don't have to invest in them. I can just
Yeah.
start scrolling. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, oh, that's a little odd. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning of your book. And then my first question is how the Psalms give us proof that it's okay to bring our despair to God. And you have
Mm.
your, well, you tell us. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a great place to start, Deborah, because for so many of us, well, I'll speak for myself. I grew up in the South. Okay. So sweet Southern culture is awesome. And part of it for me and what was modeled for me growing up was kind of this I'm good. We're busy, but we're good. And like not confronting a lot of emotion or conflict and at times kind of just shoving that under the rug was something I became really good at as a sweet Southern girl. And what tended to happen is I would place that same kind of structure on how I handle conflict or discomfort, fill in the blank, onto my relationship with the Lord. And the challenge in that is I never dealt with things, right? I never confronted bitterness in my heart. I didn't confront maybe the despair or doubt in my heart over, like, God, how are you going to show up in this particular way? Or will I ever get to experience that or whatever? So it can really pop up, I think, in us when we're in seasons of waiting, which is what we're talking about. And so as I began to read the Psalms more and just watch how the psalmist, how David just cried out to the Lord in so many instances, it really convicted my heart, Deborah, if I'm honest, of like, man, have I been that honest with the Lord about my own challenges, about my own waiting? And I hadn't. And I think the truth in that to remember for us is that God can handle it. Like he is powerful enough. He is holy, he is righteous, he is in control. He's merciful and gracious towards us and like that God of the universe who created all things is lord over our lives and the timeline of it and how he is going to choose to work and he can handle our emotion about it. And one of the most helpful things we can do is go to him honestly in prayer and be honest before him about our struggles. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge important thing to talk about when it comes to waiting. So, I'm glad that you brought that up.
then in your, and I have been doing your Search Me prayer and it does center and it does help. And working through the book, I mean, I was on your launch team, so I read it
Yeah.
through once through the art copy. And then when I got the book line, I'm like, okay, I have to work. That was my thing. I got to,
Mm.
because it's hard to work it out on digital
Yeah.
for
Oh,
me.
totally.
And so then I started working through it. And so then when, and in your chapter, Despair and Joy, it beautifully shows us how God is writing our story even when we don't know it. And but how do we deal with this? Like how do we that tension?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a tension there because usually we're waiting in the meanwhile. That's what causes us to feel the way that we're feeling about it is because there's something we're longing for that in our perspective, from our limited perspective, God hasn't provided yet. And so we're sitting in the middle of that. And there's a few things I would say there. I'll go back to the search me God prayer because I think that that is a huge piece of this. I kept coming back to this passage in Psalm 139 as I was writing the book, and verses 23 and 24 say, "Search my heart, O God, try me and know my anxious thoughts. And if there be a grievous way in me, lead me in the way everlasting." And I think that's such a helpful guide if you don't know where to start in talking to the Lord about your waiting, because we can just go to Him and say, God, just search my heart, examine my heart, show me where this season of waiting is causing anxiety in me or where I'm maybe not fully trusting in you. And would you lead me back to truth in that? Would you show me your perspective? Would you give me your wisdom? And so I do think that's a huge piece of it. And then also not missing our lives in the meanwhile, too. I can think back on some seasons of my life where, let's say, I was waiting on a husband or sitting in the midst of a season of singleness. And I really struggled to just be faithful to what God put in front of me for that
Mm.
season. And as I look to the future, I don't want to miss that. Right? Like, I don't wanna miss how God is at work today because I'm so focused on what I hope he provides me tomorrow. And so I think those 2 things are helpful, really getting honest before the Lord and asking him to examine our hearts. And then as we talked about a moment ago with beauty and with body image, yes, it's a struggle, and let's not let it get in the way of our lives and miss out on what God is doing today. So I think that's a huge piece of it as well.
One I'm not sure if I wrote this in here, but one concept that just really got me was this like because and it just had happened to me was
Mm,
the whole like you're longing for something and then you finally get it and then immediately you're longing for something else and I was just
mm.
like that had just happened to me with something in my publishing journey. So I had been longing for
Yeah.
something, got it, and I was longing again, and I was almost like missing that that thing. And the only thing I could kind of compare it to is when we were house shopping, like our
Yeah.
and it was so fun, like looking up different houses and imagining what it'd be like to live in them, right? And then
Yeah.
we picked the one, and I love the house we picked, but there was that
Yeah.
feeling before that we had picked it, that kind of longing that I really enjoyed that part. I kind of
Mhm.
missed it. And I thought, what that's. But then when I read your, that we will always be longing, and then let's talk
Yeah.
about that, that really like put it into perspective for me and helped me
Yeah.
kind of put some boundaries and parameters around that.
Yeah, that's such an important piece of this too, Deborah, and I say in the book that longing leads to more longing, which is kinda what you're saying, right?
Yes.
And I tell a story of a season when I was single before I married Dustin, and I visited this bed and breakfast that I love in East Tennessee. I was speaking at a conference. I brought my mom to this particular retreat, and I remember sitting in the room where we stayed and just thinking, "Oh, this would be like such a special experience to share with my spouse one day." And then there came a day after Dustin and I got married where we got to go and we got to stay in that same room where I'd stayed with my mom all those years earlier. And my last name had changed. I was married. I got the thing I was longing for. And yet, then my heart experienced this longing of, oh, it would be so special to bring our kids here one day and experience this as a family. And so I think that's just one of many examples of what that can look like. And just as you mentioned with publishing, I was talking to a friend the other day, and I've written 2 traditionally published books and have many threads of, I hope, books that will be to come. But even as a traditionally published author, I struggle with kind of that idol of performance. Like, I done enough to get to do it again? And will that cycle ever end in the industry that we're in? And how do we manage it and be faithful, but also see our work rightly? And so my friend looked at me and she was like, "Man, it never ends, does it?" Like the longing never ends. And so I think it really is what we do with it because, as you said, we are living in a broken world, which we know, right? Things are not as they were in the Garden of Eden as God created things to be in perfect fellowship with Him. That was severed because of sin. Jesus came and made a way for us to have a restored relationship with God, and we await his return when he comes and sets all things right, and we have no reason to have to hope any longer. We have no reason to experience longing, and all things are perfect. But that day is not today, right? And
Exactly.
so those things that our hearts long for are really, to play it all the way out, they are imperfect glimpses as at what our ultimate longing is, which is perfect, unhindered fellowship with God. And so if we see that rightly, I think it helps us understand maybe what God's doing in us as we wait. Because, and I'm sure you would agree, Deborah, seasons of waiting that I've experienced on earth have been some of the greatest teachers to me. They've been some of the greatest refiners in me. And I've just seen such evidence of God's hand at work in the midst of the waiting if I'm choosing to see it rightly. And so I think that's a huge piece of it.
I think that's so true, Rebecca. I do believe that it, God brings us everything that we need in the time that we need it, especially when
Yep.
it comes to helping us move along and things. And for me,
Mhm.
that comes a lot in the books I read.
Yeah.
And so, and
Yeah.
it's always like at the perfect timing. I'm like, okay, I needed this. Cause so I had faced, and this is in publishing, but it could also be in friendship. It could be in many things,
Sure.
faced a rejection. And I've had faced rejection in my work field, so much of it. I mean, just
Yeah.
like for anybody who wants to be tested with rejection, get into
Just
be a
start writing.
writer, be
Yeah.
in the entertainment business, be an actor.
You wanna get
If
really
you
good at it, write a book. That's what you
yeah,
need to
write
do.
a book. If you want to know about rejection, but I've also had this tendency because I also got acceptance things, and so,
Yeah.
and I was like, why am I focusing on the rejection and not the other things? And then your book kind of helped me redirect that in the sense that using the redirection as God redirecting me in a
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
because I didn't need to be where those not that they were bad or anything. He just
Yeah.
wanted me. Maybe they were becoming a little idolish. Maybe I
Yes.
needed to pull back. Maybe I needed to be humble, and maybe I was getting a little prideful. Like, oh,
Yeah.
well, they don't want me. I'm
Yeah.
like, like,
Yeah.
getting a little
Talk about it.
prideful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it was a moment to humble me and to say,
Yeah.
okay, and then also then to not be jealous
Yeah.
of the ones that did get accepted. And that's why when I told you before we started that I had to reread your jealousy trapped chapter and
Mm.
work through it again
Yeah.
because it was something that was starting to get at me. So we're kind of jumping around with the questions a little bit. So in your jealousy chapter, how do we stop this vicious cycle of jealousy?
Yeah. It's such a huge piece of it. And I mean, let's be honest, it's something that we all struggle with. And I think sometimes we in our current culture will kind of mask it and call it comparison. And we have cute little words that we use to kind of undermine the fact that, like, envy and jealousy is a sin.
Yes.
Envy
Yeah.
and jealousy is something that distracts us from what God is doing in our lives. It's often something the enemy will use to distract us from God's plan for us and us being able to experience his joy in our current season of life. So it's nothing good. That's my
No,
point.
no.
And so many times I can look back and I've had instances where my own envy has totally robbed me from experiencing joy or being able to experience joy for someone else. I'll give a quick personal example that was recent. My husband and I have been married almost 6 years, and we do not have kids yet. I'm in my 30s, so all my friends are having babies. And I had a baby shower to go to a couple of weeks ago. And that is one of those opportunities where I kind of have a choice, right? I can hold both my desire to become a mom one day and my joy for my friend getting to experience God's blessing in her family's life. I can hold both of those at the same time, right? I can give both the time and attention they deserve, which part of that is kind of pre-grieving that before I go to the baby shower, going to the Lord and saying like, "You know my heart. You know that it won't be easy for me to walk into this baby shower, and would you grant me the joy that doesn't feel like it exists in my heart today? Like I can only show up in a way that is joyful and celebratory for her with your strength and with your joy, and so would you give me that?" And those things have helped, just being really honest and being really honest before the Lord. And then I would say this the sticky statement, that's the publishing term, that has been helpful for me with envy and jealousy is her win is not my loss.
Mm.
So just remembering like back when I was single, I was a bridesmaid 12 times before I married Dustin and got to marry off all my friends before I got to get married myself. And I remember a friend looking at me once and going like, "Yeah, I know you're struggling with this whole marriage thing, but, like, he wasn't your guy. Like, he was her guy. And so, like, go celebrate what God is doing in her life, and it's not to the exclusion of how he's at work in you." And so, we can apply that across so many seasons of life, but her win is not your loss. That's been
Mm.
very helpful to me. One of the things I talk about is how to answer really personal questions because so many times I'll stick with the baby shower example. We know we're going to go to the baby shower and it's likely if you're in your 30s and you don't have kids, you're going to be asked, "So, are you and your husband hoping to have children?" Right? Questions like that naturally come up that kind of bump up against our longing. And one of the worst things we can do to our hearts is not be prepared to answer that question because so many times we get caught off guard. We unintentionally get offended. The friend of our moms who we haven't seen in 15 years, she just wants to know about our life. She's not trying to offend you by asking when you're having kids. And so what's been helpful to me is sitting back and going, "Okay, how can I answer her question in a way that gives grace to my season and her for asking the question without over justifying or over explaining my season," which is really not necessary in that situation. And so one of the biggest tips I can give in conversations like that is to redirect. However, you decide to say, "That's sweet of you to ask. We're excited for that in God's timing. But I'd love to tell you about what He is doing in this season of our lives," and just redirect to whatever that is. I think on the receiving end of that's helpful, but I also think that teaches us how to be a really good friend as well, because one of my favorite pieces of advice is to just be about whatever God is doing in your friend's life, right? Like if you have the friend who's hoping to become a grandparent and her kids are struggling to conceive, but you see this other area of their life where God is really at work and you know that the fertility issue is causing a lot of grief, like pray for that. Ask for God's discernment and how to ask about that, but be about whatever God is doing, right?
Mm.
And ask about that, be concerned about that, be supportive of that. And so whether it's on the giving or receiving end, I think there's some intentional things we can do that will help.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's good because sometimes we don't want to overshare too when it's
Yeah,
not when it's not needed. Sometimes
right.
that some things are more for a private conversation or
Yeah.
between you and God maybe. And
Yeah.
if we pre-decide how we're going to respond, how we're going to act, we can navigate our way through some of these
Yeah.
difficult areas. Now, let's go into your I thought this was a fascinating chapter in the hurry and rest.
Mm,
And then when you said be a beginner at something,
yeah.
why does
That's
that
so hard for me.
why why does that help us?
Yeah, I think it is I think it's so helpful. So the example I give in the book is I took a pottery class, which was something that I'd always wanted to do, and I signed up for it with one of my best friends, and Deborah, I was horrible at it, which because you've read that chapter. And I walked out of the class so frustrated because I mean, I'm a pretty crafty person. Like I pick up things like that pretty quickly. And so what I found frustrating was like it didn't just naturally happen for me. I would have really had to work hard and be intentional to just slow down and follow step by step in order to become good at it. But I also think that's like a really healthy practice for us to have things in our lives that we are putting a measured effort towards, that we have to slow down in order to learn things that we do with our hands that get us away from technology and using a different part of our brain. All of those things actually refresh me so much, and I actually find really restful, and I think it's partially because of that term, and I didn't coin this, but if you work with your mind, rest with your hands. And if
Hmm.
you work with your hands, rest with your mind. So, for someone who maybe works outside a lot vocationally, they might find reading a book to be a really restful thing. Where for you or I, like if I'm in the middle of a book launch season, the last thing I want to read, if I'm honest, is Christian nonfiction because it's what I'm writing and it's my work. And so I'm digging into scripture. I'm maybe reading a fiction book, but that's about it in this season of my life. And so I do think those hobbies that we pick up or things that we choose to be a beginner at can be a really good teacher in kind of that measured journey of improving at something and being okay being an amateur. That's really hard for some of us, including myself.
And then let's see. I think we had talked about some rejection earlier, but then one thing about rejection that you also had in your that you wrote about was the whole thing of swinging the bat again, like
Yeah.
that, like how that past rejection may stump us, I guess, when we
Yeah.
when we want to try anything again. And I do see that. I mean, I'm kind of my kind of personality. Although rejection deeply affects me,
Yeah.
it it doesn't stop me though. Like
Yeah.
to me, it's like, oh, okay, that just like, what can I learn? What can I? How can I? To me, it's not. No, it's not yet,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
sense. But I do go through that whole period before I get to the not yet. That's just like
Sure.
excruciating. But I do see where the bat thing stops a lot of people
Mm.
from trying again. I have a friend who had a terrible breakup and just doesn't want to ever
Mm.
try again.
Yeah.
Although that's what she longs for more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a hard thing, and I've seen it affect people that I love in so many different ways. I think you and I are pretty similar in that, I mean, if I sense that God has called me to something, I know that he is in control. I know that he will provide in his timing. And so not in the sense of like just rushing ahead of him, but like I can be a little bit of a bulldog in terms of not giving up in the face of rejection. That's actually something that I have struggled less with, I would say. Like, I'm actually okay with it. I have other people in my life who it absolutely cripples them, and it is really hard for them to stand back up and try again, or they sort of internalize it as this, like, anger towards the person who said no or whatever. I've seen that many, many, many times in the publishing arena as well, rather than just thinking through, like, this was a business decision. It wasn't the right fit. That's okay. Like that if God has called me to this work, then I also have to believe that he will orchestrate the means, and
Hmm.
that wasn't it. Okay, so that's a closed door, and let's keep walking towards whatever door God might open. And so that's really easy for me to say and very hard to live. But it really is a redirection from him many times towards whatever
Hmm.
he has for us if we choose to see it that way. Now, do we take the time to grieve that? Of course. And does it hurt? Every time. But I do think it is a really healthy thing to step back and see it from more of an eternal perspective, which is to say, I do believe that you're in control. I do believe that you will provide the means. I believe that you'll orchestrate this in your timing. And so, do I still feel called to this? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then I stand back up and try again, even if it takes me a
Hmm.
while. But it's a huge part of our waiting.
Hmm. And that's the whole thing. Like so, your book, your not too late. Trusting God's timing in a hurry up world. I mean, I think in some sense we all might feel too late in many areas. And I would love for you to talk about the same bench, the same
Yeah.
waterfall, and how, because I think this completely illustrates what your book is about
Yeah.
and how God orchestrated this through your life. We can start looking at his handprints through our own life and have that kind
Yeah.
of excitement like, oh, me too, you know.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I would love to share that story. I just feel so honored that God let me write it into a book because it's one of my favorite stories that he's told in my life so far. So, both my husband and I love the Smokies. It's we love living here, we love sharing it with people that we love, and both love to hike, and he loves to fly fish. There's nowhere in the world he would rather be than on a trout stream in the Smokies. And many, many years ago, he went fishing by himself one day, which is not a rare occurrence for him, and he hiked up his favorite trail in the Smokies to fish, and he fished for several hours, and it got a little bit dreary, so he finished fishing and was going to hike back down the trail, and he found this bench along the way, and he sat there. There's a waterfall in the background just in front of the bench, and he was really struggling that particular day with his own singleness and watching all of his friends get married and wondering if it would ever be his turn. And he prayed for his future wife sitting there on the bench. And as he recounts the story, he says, I stood up and I thought, totally in faith, I'm going to take a picture of this bench. And hopefully one day I'll get to bring my future wife here and show her that this is one of the places where I prayed for her. Well, years later, I went on a hike one day with a dear friend of mine and was kind of having a similar day, Deborah. Like I had just been in my 12th wedding and was just really hopeful that God would provide a husband for me one day and was just really longing for that. And a lot of the hike, I just silently prayed on the trail and prayed for my future husband. And lo and behold, we stopped at a bench along the way on that trail and took some pictures. And I posted a picture that we took on my Instagram after we left the trail that day and didn't really think a lot else about it. But once I started dating Dustin, he called me one day and had seen the photo that I posted on Instagram. And it triggered that memory of the day that he prayed for his future wife. At this point, we were like looking at rings. We knew we were going to get married. And he told me the story of the day that he went fishing and then showed me both photos. And God had sent us to the same trail, to the same bench in two very similar moments in our lives, years apart, when we didn't know how God was going to answer that prayer or if either of us would get married. And I just think it's such a testament to how God is at work in us, through us, around us in ways that we don't know today and couldn't have predicted. And it's a story that I certainly couldn't have written for us or Dustin couldn't have written for us. But it just makes me so grateful and hopeful in other seasons of waiting in my life to know, huh, like he was so faithful then and that is consistent of his character forever. And so I can continue to trust in how he's writing my story.
The wonderful thing also about the story is Dustin did get to take you there. He
Yeah,
did.
yeah, that's where he proposed.
Right,
Yes.
right, right. And so
Yes.
it was just
Yes.
so touching. And I've been in those mountains too, and I love the Smoky Mountains. And they
Yeah.
are just, I think for a marriage, that they're like this, oh, a metaphor in a sense, you know, like I
Yeah.
like an ascent towards marriage, towards God. And I like what you said about your marriage is that you knew you needed a husband that loved the Lord. And
Yeah.
that the one thing about in there, which was just so beautiful. I see you who you're going to be
Yeah.
in heaven.
Yeah.
And that's love.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this Tim Keller quote in his book, The Meaning of Marriage, that we quote in that book. And I'll butcher it, but it, the heart of it is one day we'll stand before God's throne, experiencing the perfection of all things, and I'll look at you and say, "I got glimpses of this on earth, but now look at you in your glorified
Oh
body."
my gosh,
And
it's
like
so
I get to
beautiful.
be a part of that in my marriage
Mm-hmm.
here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And what a beautiful picture. I mean, that is marriage. That is the point of marriage is and because we're imperfect, an imperfect glimpse at Christ and his church, his bride. And so, yeah, I mean, I think what a beautiful picture of that to kind of play it all the way out. And those are Tim Keller's words, not mine, but I think they're so beautiful. And just for anyone who is walking through that season of singleness or is just longing for that, and I'm so thankful I didn't settle for less than a
Hmm.
husband who desired that too.
Well, and I think that's such an important thing about things of waiting.
That's exactly what we've been talking about, right? Like, I don't want to miss God's hand in my current season of life. And we do know that to be true, that He has prepared good works in advance for us to do. And I think that's such a comfort while we're waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's stick with the publishing example to know, okay, God, you've given me this peace about this journey and moving forward towards that. If I'm feeling a rub or some rejection or whatever it may be, I know that you've prepared that path. And so I'm trusting in the journey from point A to point B, even though it doesn't make sense today.
So Ephesians 2:10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them.
So good.
And yes, we use the publishing example, but I think that can be used for so many things in life.
Yeah.
So, what's upcoming for Rebecca? And where
Yeah.
can everybody find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very much still getting the message of You're Not Too Late out into the world right now. And so the full title of it again is You're Not Too Late, Trusting God's Timing in a Hurry Up World. You can grab it wherever you like to buy books, Amazon, Christian Book, Barnes and Noble, all the places. And I'm the most active over on Instagram. My handle is Rebecca George Author. So you can definitely find me there. Camp for Creatives is upcoming for me. So that's coming up in
Yay.
September, which I'm super excited about. I love, as I've said a couple times, hosting friends in the Smokies. So if you're a fellow creative listening who would want to join us, feel free to check that out on my website as well. And all things Radical Radiance and me can be found at radicalradiance.live.
That is so wonderful. And would you like to say a prayer for our listeners?
Oh, I would love to. I'd love to.
Okay.
God, we just come before you and just thank you for this time and just how you are at work in us, even in the waiting. And we just lay those situations before you, whatever our listeners may be facing today, and just know that you are in control. You are so faithful in our lives, and you have a character that we can depend on, we can stand on in the middle of the waiting. And we just praise you for that. And just pray that you would continue to make yourself known in each listener's life as they trust you, as they place their full hope in you in the middle of the waiting. We just give each one of those situations to you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and for writing your books and being this shining light in our world and your champion for us writers. I mean, it just setting that kind of bar where we're not competitive or comparing and where we're supporting each other and kind of lifting us up. And so thank you.
Oh, Deborah, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for the chance to share. And I'm just grateful for the work that you're doing and how God is using you. So it's just been a joy to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Beholder Beauty podcast. Please be sure to pick up Rebecca George's new book, You're Not Too Late, Trusting God in a Hurry Up World. Also, you can pick up Unexpected Blessings, 40 Days of Discovering God's Best. Both books are on Amazon. And please follow, like, comment, subscribe wherever you like to listen. It's so nice when you do, and it just gives us so much joy. And stay tuned for next week. Subscribe, and that way you won't miss an episode. We have a free resource coming out for summer. It is a free PDF download, A Summer to Cultivate Beauty. Summer beauty tips for your body, mind, and soul. You can find the link in the show links. Thank you so much, and God bless.